this dearly departed soul, Theodore M. Glancy, was an ardent abolitionist. In his youth, he spoke frequently on that subject to audiences across the great state of Illinois. He was a partner in a law office in Peoria when the War of Rebellion broke out. One day, in the spring of 1861, he saw a regiment of Union volunteers march by his window and said, "The conviction of duty entered my soul." Without consulting his associates or advising his partners or even letting his family know, he enlisted as a private in the 7th Regiment of Illinois Volunteers. Mr. Glancy saw fighting at the Siege of Vicksburg, Port Hudson, the Yazoo River, and Jackson, Mississippi. He was proud to fight side by side with the 1st Regiment of Color, the 1st and 3rd Louisiana Native Guards, in their premier engagements of the Civil War. But Mr. Glancy was not prepared for what awaited him in Santa Barbara, California, where he became the editor of the Santa Barbara Morning Press newspaper.
Whoa.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I seek justice. I, Theodore M. Glancy, editor of the Santa Barbara Morning Press, was murdered on September 25th, 1880, in broad daylight on State Street. I was fatally shot by the notorious Clarence Gray. And at the time, Clarence, he was the Republican nominee for county district attorney. I'm not making this up, folks. The quarrel, which culminated in the tragedy of my untimely demise, grew out of editorials written by me about the character of Gray. The Morning Press declared Gray to be a man of bad reputation and wholly unfit to be district attorney. In fact, I characterized him as a hoodlum and a lawbreaker. And to prove that he was neither, he attacked and murdered me. Exhibit A, the character of Clarence Gray, or lack thereof. My murderer arrived in Santa Barbara in 1870, and he was immediately recognized as a natural leader among our rough element. You know, the gamblers, the sporting men, public spitters, those who would spend their Sunday mornings in saloons. You know the type. Clarence Gray was their king. He was reckless and unscrupulous, corrupt and audacious. He was untrustworthy and greedy. King Clarence, however, was more intelligent and better educated than his subjects. You know, like myself, my killer was educated in the law. And whereas I used my knowledge to uphold justice, Clarence used his to exploit loopholes in the legal codes and defend the habitual lawless. This made him a hero among Santa Barbara's carousing class. Exhibit B, his record of arrests. Dear citizens, did you know that Clarence Gray, candidate for district attorney, had been arrested more than 20 times? 20 times! Certainly you remember reading about the assault of Father Francis on the very steps of the old mission. As the faithful departed after the service, Clarence clubbed dear old Father Francis for a reproof justly delivered from the pulpit. Oh, he was found guilty and fined $20. Gray was later heard to jest that he had pulled his fist out of the frying pan and into the fryer. Exhibit C. My killer's actions. They were premeditated. Gray stalked me throughout town over the course of 2 days, and it began immediately after my editorial was published. Gray stormed into the offices of Judge D.P. Hatch, and he was red-faced and perspiring, and he glared at me from under the damp brim of his straw hat. "Was it you?" he snarled, waving his immense walking stick threateningly at my person. I replied graciously, "I beg your pardon, sir?" I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of unnerving me. "The editorial in the paper, are you the author?" he demanded. I replied promptly, "I am, sir." Well, something in the appearance of the judge or the other parties present convinced the cowardly Gray to lower his staff and slink away. Now, the following night, at my little house on Cota Street, there was a loud banging on the door during supper. Setting down my soup spoon, wiping my lips, I answered the door, hatless and in my vest. And there stood Gray, his hand twitching suspiciously in his coat. "Step outside, Glancy," he snarled, and his mustache was quivering. "We've got something to discuss." Well, at that moment, my wife and my daughter came up behind me in the doorway. "Would you challenge me in front of my wife and daughter?" I asked. Gray, he remained silent. "And what's more," I continued, "I am unarmed. And, my soup, it cools on the table." Now, Gray lowered his head and left, but shaking with rage and kicking the begonias along the garden path. I have no doubt that he went to his precious house of worship, the Bank Exchange Saloon. Now, Exhibit D, the murder. The morning following our encounter at my home, Gray ambushed me at the Occidental Hotel on State Street. He drew his revolver, and my eyes, they focused on that gleaming pistol, an English patent revolver, self-cocking, carried a half-ounce ball, a most deadly weapon. I grabbed Gray by the wrists, and I remarked, "You shall not draw on me. I am unarmed, sir." And a bystander, I don't remember who, separated us. Well, Gray lowered his shoulders and started to walk away, then turned, drew, pointed his pistol directly at me, and fired as he exited the door with lethal effect. The bullet got me in the right arm, just below the wrist, and it continued on into my abdomen. It went through my stomach, and it lodged near my left hip. I staggered to the Morris house at State and Haley before I collapsed. Gray, in the meantime, he followed me, endeavoring to obtain another shot, but onlookers prevented it. I was tended to by doctors Bates, Winchester, and Woods. but I died the following day in the presence of friends. My wife was unable to get there in time. My last words were, "Tell my friends I die like a man. I die for a principle and would not go back on it now if I could." Exhibit E. The efforts at justice. The ne'er-do-wells in our town managed to raise $4,000 to defend my executioner. $4,000! That's like $120,000 today. And the first trial did take place in Santa Barbara. And Gray lied under oath, claiming that he had acted in self-defense and that I had thrown the first punch. And he provided unscrupulous witnesses to corroborate this fantasy. The defense was so well planned, or the jury so well selected, that justice was defeated. The trial ended in a hung jury. The second trial took place in San Mateo County, and it concluded at 5 p.m. on Saturday, June 11th, 1881. Now at 9 a.m. the very following morning, the jury returned to the courthouse. Gray didn't seem prepared for a verdict to be rendered so soon. He was clearly nervous as the jury came back into the courtroom. The foreman read the verdict. Murder in the second degree, guilty. Gray turned white. The efforts by his counselor to console him had little effect. He was immediately escorted off to jail, and his wife met him at the jailhouse, threw herself into his arms. Her weeping could be heard across town. Gray, stone-faced. But a year later, the California Supreme Court determined that indeed the jury had consumed vast quantities of beer, whiskey, and wine during sequestration, during deliberations. Suspicious, don't you think? They had no choice but to vacate the verdict and order a third trial. And there was a third trial, and it was in San Mateo County. And he was acquitted! And then he disappeared from public view. The San Diego Union said this about him. Mr. Glancy was an enthusiastic Republican and a man of perfect candor and integrity. He faced the rebels in arms throughout the war, and his courage was of the highest character. In fact, he was brave to rashness. For though in his journalistic career, he always wrote with unhesitating bluntness what he believed to be the truth, he could never be induced to take any precautions against personal attacks. So at last, he was shot down unarmed. So in summation, ladies and gentlemen, especially since it's raining, every community needs newspapers devoted to the truth and justice. In my era, it was not uncommon for editors to be attacked and even assassinated for their courageous writings. I'm sure the Santa Barbara News Press carries on this courageous tradition. Don't they? I may rest my case, but my soul, Oh, it remains agitated. Justice! Justice! Justice!
Noted local businessman J.P. Stearns was so moved by the passing of Mr. Glancy that he paid for an impressive headstone for Glancy in St. Helena, Illinois, with the inscription, "I died for a principle and would not go back on it now if I could." Thus concludes this grave matter. This way, please.